So for the last 3 weeks, I've been showing you the same picture. Well, I change the picture every week, but the same couple over the last 3 weeks. It's John and Julie Gottman. So John Gottman, if you haven't heard this, over 40 years ago, he and his research partner started a relationship laboratory. It was so interesting. And they would bring these couples in, and they would hook them up to machines. And I know it's a little hard to see because the picture is dark, but they've got all these machines monitoring everything. Like how fast is their heart beating, how high is their blood pressure, how much sweat is in their palm, how much movement is going on as they sit in the chair. And they made the couples talk to each other. And one of the things that they had them do was have a fight that they had to try and resolve in 15 minutes. And then they videotaped everything, as you can see. And one of the interesting things that they did that I didn't know is that after the session was over, they pulled them off into separate rooms and they had videos, right? So they would sit there and make them watch the video, and then they would hit pause at certain points and go, what were you thinking right here? What thoughts were in your mind right here? And so they got like insider information so they could see what was happening in the moment, but then they got to talk to the couple and say, what was going on up here in the moment that you said this or didn't say anything. And they learned so much, and they identified over the years of doing this that there are 4 key elements that if you allow them into any relationship, and we've been talking a lot about marriage relationship, but do not limit this to marriage. This works with parenting relationships, it works with work relationships, school relationships, anywhere where you have relationships. And if these 4 elements show up, the relationship will begin to die. And they called these things, again, I love that because it's not like, oh my goodness, why did the relationship fall apart? You can actually look and see why the relationship fell apart. There are legitimate reasons why the relationship isn't going the way that it should be going. And then they're solvable. You don't have to have those. You can change those, and that's what this series has been all about. So they called these things the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because when they show up in a relationship, the relationship's going to start dying. So we've covered criticism and contempt and defensiveness the last few weeks. Now we're into stonewalling. But criticism is really important because it's where everything really kind of begins. Once the relationship, and all of you know this, if you've ever been in a relationship, I've never seen this different, but in every relationship, there's always one who's a little more critical than the other. And once criticism begins to develop in the relationship and begins to be expressed in the relationship, then all of a sudden the relationship can quickly go into all these other ones. So let's say that you're married to a person and you just wish so much that they were a hooker, and they're not a hooker. They just throw their wet towel on the floor. They never hook it up on anything. So you're like, oh, I wish they were a hooker, but they're not. And I've tried and tried and tried over and over again. And so one day you come into the bedroom and there's their wet towel on the bedroom floor again for the 1,751st time. And you lose it, right? You lose it. You let them have it. Okay, so we're no longer talking about the issue, right? The issue is wet towel on the floor. Now we attack the person, and it goes to, you are so inconsiderate. Are you a nincompoop that you just can't remember to hang this up, right? So we've gone from talking about the issue into attacking the person. That's criticism. Totally fine to talk about an issue. Totally wrong to cross into attacking the person. The moment you cross into that, you're in criticism, back on this one, and then if that doesn't get resolved, contempt is natural, right? Pretty soon you start thinking they are so dumb. They are so dumb a human being that they just can't get this, right? And I'm better and they're lesser. Now what does that trigger in them, right? Defensiveness. And what we're going to be talking about today, it can naturally trigger something called stonewalling, which many of you have never probably, I'd heard of it, but I never really understood it. If you want to understand it in a real simple context, all you have to do is go out after the service is over and find a stone wall and start talking to it. So you will catch on really quick what stonewalling is really about, right? Have a conversation with a stone wall, and you'll get right away what they're talking about. So this is, again, the 4th one. If this shows up in your relationship, some of you have seen this before. Some of you may never have seen it before. Probably unlikely. Probably at some point in your lifetime, all of you have seen stonewalling. So what's going on with this? And why is it so damaging? Because it doesn't seem as damaging as some of the other ones. Well, we're going to talk about that as we continue our series today called Relationship Restart. And we're going to talk about what do we do if stonewalling shows up in our relationship. In your program are these notes. Would you grab them? Grab a pen, something to write with. And again, welcome, of course, to all of you watching online. So glad that you're tuning in for this series. If you go to our website at penulchurchlife.com, you can get these notes. So jump right into this. First thing I want you to understand is I really want you to understand what stonewalling is. So we can't solve a problem if we don't really understand it and what's happening, and that's what this first thing is going to be all about, is really understanding what stonewalling is. And you don't have to listen to my descriptions today because the Gottmans put out online a video of one of the couples that they were working with over the years who actually did stonewalling. Watch the wife in this video. The audio is just what it is. This is stonewalling. Watch her facial expressions.
Wow. Well, what do you want to talk about the money? What about you want to talk about? On the money part.
Ever seen that? That's stonewalling. Okay? So let's talk about what it is. This description I found online. Stonewalling is when someone emotionally shuts down and withdraws from the interaction. It can appear that they are ignoring you or pretending like you aren't even there. Right? There are a lot of little elements that can go along with it. It wasn't her. I mean, her face was pretty easy to read, right? Sitting here. Like, that's stonewalling. So stonewalling includes things like the silent treatment. You saw that in the video, right? She's just not responding. It includes, sometimes they just walk away. I read about a couple that had been married 7 years, and they had so many bad fights about money in their 7 years that the moment the wife would bring it up, he would just walk out of the room. Stonewalling. It includes no eye contact. Did you notice that from her? She wouldn't look at him. She just wouldn't look at them. Acting busy sometimes, not answering what they're saying, ignoring them, or little simplistic answers. You ever have anyone go, I'm fine. I'm fine. And they're not fine. You know they're not fine. But it's their default reaction. So these are all characteristics of what stonewalling sounds like. So the question is, why does this happen? Why do people stonewall in relationships? And this is really important to understand. The reality is that, according to their research, is what the Gottmans discovered is that people stonewall when they feel emotionally flooded. You ever heard that phrase, flooding? It is a key thing that they talk about. So flooding is triggered by this. So this is a simplistic picture of your brain. So information enters through the spinal cord. It comes to the middle part, which is the limbic system. This is where you feel things emotionally, and then it's supposed to travel through there over to the rational center of your brain. So you ever have seen this experiment or this little tool where you hold your hand up like this and put your thumb across the middle and then fold your fingers down over it, okay? This, they said, is a simplistic picture of what your brain is like. So it's like the front part here, this is where the thinking centers of your brain are, rational thought, problem solving, creativity, that's here. And then down deep inside is the amygdala, the emotional centers of your brain. What the picture is showing is what we do not know we do not know intuitively. We tend to think, and I think men especially think this, is that we tend to be rational beings who occasionally feel things. And that's not true. We are all emotional beings who occasionally think things. That's the reality. Because data from our body travels in through the emotional centers of the brain first. And then it has to be passed on to the thinking, rational centers of your brain. Now here's what happens when you get flooded. When you get flooded, you trigger what they call, all of you know this, the fight, flight, or flee model. What happens is that there is a disconnection between the emotional center of your brain and the rational center of your brain. When you get flooded, there's a break. Your body views that person as a threat. And so all of a sudden, once they're a threat and you're flooded, this breaks. And instead of sending the information onto your brain, your emotional centers of your body shift the blood flow away from your brain into your hands so you can fight back, or your feet so you can run away. And you get less oxygen in your thinking centers of your brain. And here's what Gottman's noticed. They said people, when they feel flooded, they are unable to process information because there's no connection here. The connection has been reduced. Did you know you actually hear less? When you feel emotionally flooded, when you're triggered like that, the amount of words that you're able to take in goes down. This explains some of your fights, doesn't it? It's like, well, I told you this, and they're like, no, you didn't. Yeah, you actually did. They just couldn't hear it. Because once flooding happens, not only do you lose your hearing, you also lose your peripheral vision. Isn't that amazing? So interesting what happens. There's obviously a reduction in creativity and problem solving, which if you're in the middle of a conflict over an issue, you kind of need to be able to solve problems, and you cannot when you're fighting and flooded. There's a reduced ability to listen and empathize. Empathy goes out the window. People are normally very empathetic are not very empathetic. And then a big one, your IQ drops 10 to 15 points. I'm not making that up. It is a temporary loss of smartness. You become dumb-er. So it's because this is where all the thinking part of your brain is, and your body has shifted all of the blood flow away from that so that the oxygen is going to your hands so you can fight back, or your feet so you can run away, or you just freeze. But the thinking rational center of your brain is changed. Now, again, this is how God made our bodies to work. God made our bodies to work this way. So I always find that fascinating whenever I think about what he has done physiologically. Now, did you know, on your notes, this is really important, in their research, 85% of all stonewallers are men. 85% of all stonewallers are men. Some of you that may surprise, some of you may not surprise, depends on your experience. And what the Gottman said, it's not a gender thing, it is that men have a lower tolerance for emotional distress. They have a lower tolerance for emotional distress. And once they feel distressed, so think about what happens. So they get in a fight, they leave the towel on the floor, and all of a sudden it's like, you idiot! Right? And so this triggers. The rational part of their brain is getting less oxygen now. They can't think, they can't hear, they can't rationalize what's going on. And so if they don't fight back and they don't just walk away, which is stonewalling, they freeze. And they just look away. They're not going to look at you. They're not going to make eye contact. And it was interesting. Remember what I said that they did? They brought those people in and they said, hey, what were you thinking right here? And here are actual comments from stonewallers. This is fascinating. One man said, I was thinking, how can I not make this worse? Another one said, if I open my mouth, I'm going to open a can of worms. Another one said, I'm going to say something I regret. Another one said, maybe she'll run out of words and I can get back to what I was doing. And another one said, I can wait this out. Don't make it worse than it is. So it's like, none of those are good options, right? None of them. But that's all you got left once this has taken place, because you've lost your thinking centers, your creative centers, you've lost all of that. And then the impact, of course, in the relationship is visible, right? There's no collaboration, there's no communication, there's no progress in solving the problems, and all you do is amplify pain. Now, have you ever experienced this? Because not everybody has. Not all of you have been in situations where you've had this flooding, where you're like, but I have. I know what this is like. You know, my wife and I had an honest conversation about this topic before, and again, total permission to talk about this in front of all of you. So sometimes I can get flooded. I'm one of the 85% of men that get flooded once in a while, and I've told her before, in the middle of some of our big fights, it's like, I can't make my brain work. And it's horrible. It's literally horrible. It's like Wake up. What's wrong? Why can't, and without understanding any of this, I didn't know what was going on. It's like, but you feel stupid. And it just paralyzes you. So has this ever happened to you, or does it ever happen in your relationship? Because it happens, and once it starts happening, all it is a pain magnifier, right? For both people. So, as I've been asking every week, how much pain is being caused in your relationships today because of stonewalling? You think about that, but then the big thing that we want to talk about is what's the cure? And the real cure is, thankfully, this one has some really solid cures for it. You create rules for healthy conflict. You've got to put some rules in place to deal with the conflict that you're going through in a healthy way. So I read, as I was prepping for this topic, I read about a man who totally understands what it's like to freeze up. He said this. He said, I remember in my previous marriage, before I even knew what stonewalling was, once I learned about it, he said, I realized, I was prone to do that. He said, it was usually a reaction to criticism and contempt that were uttered in a very loud voice. So you get it? She came at him, and she wasn't talking about the issue. She was talking about him, and there was contempt, and he said, freeze. Freeze. And he said, my thoughts were like, oh no, it's that kind of argument again. They've been nasty in the past. I don't want to do it again. He said, so I would just shut down. And he said, I love this sentence. Look at this. This is what it's like. If you've ever frozen, you totally get this. At that time, my brain felt absolutely empty. It was hard to think of anything at all. So if you've ever experienced this, that's exactly what it's like. It's like there's nothing in there. And shouldn't there be something in there? And you can't make something show up. So the good news is this one's very solvable. So here are the solutions. Letter A on your notes, take a break. First thing, you gotta take a break. If you get triggered and you feel flooded, the first thing you got to do is take a break. And the break is important for both people. As a matter of fact, I was reading through the book of Proverbs this week, and I read this verse. I've never noticed it until this week. Look at this. Anger is cruel, and wrath is like a flood. Isn't that interesting? It's like a flood. And again, don't assume that the only person being flooded is the one who's panicking and being silent. Oh, no. Was the wife, when she walked in and saw the wet towel on the floor, was she flooded? Oh, my goodness, she was flooded with anger and rage and wrath, right? Both were being flooded. One was being aggressive with their flooding, and one was being frozen with their flooding. And so again, what we want to do is we want to get that flood under control, and here's how. You take a break for 25 minutes at least, and maybe you want to write at least next to it. At least 25 minutes, you got to hit the pause button on this conflict because you are not going to make any progress once somebody's flooded. Take a break for at least 25 minutes. And this was so interesting to read about in the studies. So Gottmans are learning all this. They're watching people get flooded. They're watching them shut down. And then all of a sudden they had an idea one day. They went in when the couple was going, one was going, rah, 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 and the other was going, ah, and freezing. And they walked into the room. And they said, oh, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. It was a lie. They weren't. And they said, we're going to have to fix the video equipment. So stop talking. You've got some magazines there. Would you pick up a magazine? Just read. Don't say anything to each other until we get this all fixed. And so the couples were like, rah, rah, okay, and picked up and read. And they made them wait for 30 minutes before they could get talking again. Do you know when this happens, physiologically, your body doesn't live in this. And after an amount of time, it goes back to normal. So they, on purpose, gave them 30 minutes to read their favorite magazine, and their bodies just reverted back. And then when they said, okay, time to get started again, they were more positive, they were more productive, they actually started solving the problems. Because physically you can't live in this, you don't live in this. You take that break, you can get back to actually addressing what the issues were. So they said this, all of you, if you're in a relationship, you have to have permission to call a timeout at any time. hey, I'm feeling flooded. Can we just take some time out here? They said every couple in a calm moment needs to come up with this before. You got to have the conversation in advance. Can we just take a break here? And it has to be okay to call time out. It has to be okay. In some relationships, it's like, no, we stay here till it's done. It's like, stop. That may work with some people. It doesn't work with everybody. If you're feeling flooded, it needs to be okay to say, we're calling a timeout. Now, what you do in that timeout is really, really important. Do not ruminate. Think about all the awful things they just said and did to you. Don't replay it over and over and over and over again in your mind, because you know what you're going to do? You're going to keep yourself in this state. So don't rush the process. So if you're the really angry one, don't sit there, like this, okay, right? Because you're going to keep them triggered. You want to let the time go by, and you want to calm down, and you want them to be able to calm down, because you can't make progress unless you calm down. You get out of that fight, flight, or flee processing. Don't feed your anger. Don't make yourself into the victim, right? Because it's easy to do that. It's like, how dare they say that to me? How dare they? Because you're going to keep yourself firing on the wrong way. It was, it's like all of you need to get a subscription to your favorite magazine. All of you. So that way, it's like, do just what they did. For me, it'd be Golf Magazine. So I'm going to go sit and read Time Out. I'm going to get my Golf Magazine and read it for 30 minutes. Okay, right? And your body has a chance to kick back into normal systems. Okay, the second thing is you got to start breathing again, which sounds so simplistic. Do you know that they can tell when somebody is about to go stonewall in the room? They're watching. Remember, they got all the stuff hooked up everywhere. They're watching. The two things they know for sure that are triggering stonewall or someone's about to stonewall is their heart starts racing. It starts going over 100 beats a minute. So they're not running anywhere. They're sitting in a chair, and their heart starts going really, really fast. And the other thing is they stop deep breathing. They either shallow breathe, or sometimes they even hold their breath. So now think about what's going on. You already have this problem where your emotions just shifted all of your oxygen to your hands or your feet, and now you stop breathing. Do you think oxygen is important for your brain? Right? Kind of important. So we really are doing all the things that are toxic to helping us actually think again. So I'm always fascinated. This is what we're trying to do. In Proverbs 14:29, we're supposed to be able to be people who, with understanding, we need to learn how to control our anger, right? On both sides of this. And so that's what this is about. It's a tool to learn how to get your anger under control. So this is the tool, and it's on your notes. It's practice 4-7-8 breathing. There's actually a way to breathe, and I only learned this about a year and a half ago. I've talked about it a couple of times because it's so interesting. And my theology works this way. Whatever we discover in the world about how our bodies work, God made that. And if we know more about how our bodies work, then we should pay attention to that because God did it on purpose. So you can go check this out yourself. Go to the Cleveland Clinic website. If you like to look up things like this, go to the Cleveland Clinic website and look up that phrase. That's where I got this information. 4-7-8 breathing is just this. You inhale through your nose for a count of 4. You hold it for a count of 7, and you exhale through your mouth for a count of 8. And physiologically, what you do when you do this is you change this. By putting oxygen back into the thinking centers of your brain, you engage them. So think about this. Again, this is how my theology works. If God made my body to work this way, what do you think he wants me to do? He wants me to do it. So breathe. By the way, this works so amazing for so many things. If you have a hard time falling asleep at night, do this. Just give this a try. Don't be skeptical. I was skeptical, and I tried it, and I won't go back. It's super important. But then the third thing, and this may be the most important, so we're going to call a timeout. We're going to start breathing, and then we're going to name our emotions. If you ever read the book of Psalms, the biggest book in your Bible, right in the middle, you will read again and again and again about this. Over and over again, these men, all men, talk about the emotions that they're experiencing in very direct ways. Look at this. I'm worn out from my groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, and they fail because of all my foes. And I could put so many verses up from the book of Psalms, and they're doing what we're talking about. What am I feeling? What am I feeling? And name the emotion. So if this is, now just so you know, this can be really, really hard. Some of you are very emotionally in touch with what you're feeling, and some of you are not. There's a reason why 85% of stonewallers are men. Gottman's research showed that men typically, he said, don't have much emotional literacy. It's like, I'm feeling something. I don't know what it is. And so in order to get better at this, we have to get better at actually paying attention to the emotions that God gave us. So here's the formula that we've been talking about every week. Use the gentle startup formula. Make yourself sit down in that timeout and go, all right, I feel what? And I feel that way because of what? And what is it that I need right now? So you follow that gentle startup formula. I feel because I need. I feel because I need. I feel because I need. Now the hard thing is, listen, I grew up, I've talked about it many times, that first line has always confused me. I feel something. I can tell you that. I can feel something. But I had no idea what it was. And so Gottman's talk about this too. Go online and Google emotional chart, and you can find charts like this. This is my favorite one. I have it on my desktop, on my laptop. I've got it on my phone. I've got it printed off. I've got it everywhere. So that when I get triggered and I feel something, I can just use a chart like this. And it sounds ridiculous to some of you who are highly emotional, intelligent people. You're like, you need a chart to know what you're feeling? Yes, I need a chart to know what I'm feeling. Absolutely, and I'm not ashamed to tell you all that. I can't tell you how many times I pull that chart out and I'm like, oh, I feel frustrated. And again, I'm going to use the formula. I feel this because of this, and here's what I need. I feel because I need. Or, man, I feel threatened because of this, and here's what I need. Do you know, again, I love what the field of neuroscience tells us about this. We know, we can hook your brain up to a machine and watch your amygdala start firing, and all the activity go there, right? So you get triggered like this, all the activity in your brain is right here. Do you know that simply trying to ask the question, what am I feeling? And then when you can actually name it, do you know what happens to this right here? The activity in the amygdala gets turned down. And all the activity shifts to the thinking center of your brain, and you can start thinking again. God wired you so that if you will name the emotion that you're feeling, you'll calm this down, and you will get your brain back. Now, for some of you, this is super easy. You're so emotionally intelligent, it's like, I can't believe he's talking about this. This is easy. It's like he's talking about breathing. That's easy too, right? So some of these are so simple. For some of you, you're really good at it. And others like me, this is a big growth curve, an area to develop. But God made our brains to work this way. Now, for me, that's essential. I have to actually sit down and go, what am I feeling? I feel because I need, in order for, and I can tell you over and over again, it's like I can feel my body kind of relax once I name it. You name it to tame it. Okay, so then what do? Well, then you use that for the last step in this process. You're going to use a gentle startup when you begin again. Because if you call a timeout, it is your job to reinitiate the conversation sometime in the next 24 hours. So if you call a timeout, because you're feeling flooded and you can't make progress, it's your job in the next 24 hours to say, let's get back to this. And you're going to use a gentle startup. Hey, I'm feeling this way because of this. Here's what I need. You're going to use this. It's interesting. I'd never, ever, ever studied the topics in this series until going through this series. I knew about the concepts, but I'd never looked into them. I didn't know that stonewalling was a thing that was an issue for me. But it's interesting. Looking back on some of the big fights, my wife and I, we're both passionate people, both have stuff from our past, and we've got junk that we've got to work through, and I can't tell you how many times we like to walk around, we like to go on long walks, 5.5 mile walks usually, 5 or 5.5 miles. Can't tell you how many times we've gone on a walk and gotten in a fight in the first mile. and you got 4.5 to go. And that's a long time. Their walks can last about 1.5 hours. And over again, what we saw, and what I've observed and I've thought about, is like we'd get in these big fights, and it would often lead to silence for a long time. And then eventually what was happening in that silence is this was taking place, right? Our systems were shifting back to normal. And then all of a sudden you can have empathy again. And you can have rational thoughts again. And it's unbelievable. I mean, we work really hard, and we're going to talk about this next week. How do you repair it if you do it wrong? Because you're going to do it wrong. How do you repair it? But so many of the repairs come good after that emotion has come back down and we're able to actually make progress. So it was almost like accidentally doing it right. But now we want to be intentional about it. So we have a rule in our relationship that says if you feel flooded, you can call time out. You can go away for a half hour or longer, whatever you need. We know what we're doing now to be able to come back and make it positive. So here's the challenge for all of you. Is stonewalling present in your relationships today? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much of an issue is this in your relationships? Is this a big issue, small, not really an issue? Is it okay for someone in your relationships to call a timeout? You know what I loved about this? You know, like I said, do your children have permission to call timeout? Do they have permission to call timeout? One of the things I thought was the best thing that Gottman said is, parents, print that emotion chart off and hang it on your fridge. And train your kids when they're feeling overwhelmed to go look at the chart. I read that and I'm like, are you kidding me? All my kids are grown and gone. I would have loved that piece of information when they were little. How incredible is that? Give them a huge advantage. Don't tell them to ignore their emotions. Actually help them identify. And there's things that we can do. And really think about how good you are at naming your emotions. Again, some of you, that part sounded so silly because you are so good at it. But I promise you there are people way more probably might like me than others that really struggle with it. Let me have you bow your heads. You know, we've been talking a lot today because it's Communion Sunday about how much of an incredible gift God has given us in His Son, Jesus Christ. And so it's so appropriate as we finish up today and we get through talking about these 4 things that really can damage loving relationships to talk about the God who did something about the damage that already existed. Our great God and Father sent His Son, Jesus Christ, into this world to pay the debt that we've created by all the times we've acted in unloving ways towards people that we said that we love. I mean, you just think about the people that we love and how many times we've been critical, or we've thought we were better than them, or we've been defensive or argumentative, or we've shut down and not repaired anything. You think about all the times we've done that, and yet what happened 2,000 years ago on the cross was Jesus took our debt in his body, paid our debt in full so that we could be completely forgiven. And maybe today is a day in which you want to receive His gift into your life. With your head bowed, you can say something like this to Him. You can say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I need you to cancel my debt. Please forgive me. I'm asking you to come and make your home inside of me today. And give me your gift of eternal life. In Jesus' name, amen. As we finish up, can I ask you all to grab the little card out of your program? Just take a moment and fill this out if you're a regular tender. If you asked Jesus to forgive you, just let us know, or you renewed your commitment, just check this box. And if you have something you want us to pray about, maybe this one touched on some painful things in your life, you're welcome to put down a prayer request here and drop it in the offering box, and our team of prayer people will pray for you today. So that's all we have today. Thanks for coming out. Hope to see you again next week.